So this evening, what we're going to do is something we've done a few times before. It's quite interesting. It is called, I call it, there's other words for this, but I call it an open interview. So we have lots of private interviews in the little room called the Hojo interview room, where I talk to people personally. And every one of these interviews is completely unique and personal. Everybody is at a different place on their practice, from right at the beginning to where? Right at the beginning. Spiritual path, in particular, this one is, you're always at the beginning. If you think you're getting somewhere, you should talk to me. So we'll do an open interview, and I'll start. We can do more than one, of course. We've got an hour or so. So are there any volunteers to do this? Well, that's nice. Start with you.
No.
No? Can't do that?
No.
AFR? Yeah, can't do it. Sorry. I would like to. Michael? Oh. I can't do it because it's public.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Have a chair, Yogi Bear.
Yes, sir.
So, where would you like to start? Questions are good.
What to do when you don't go to war?
Well, so what Michael's referring to is, I often say, don't go to war or lose the war, something like that. We tend to fight with each other over all kinds of things. So what to do when you don't go to war? Just hold still. Don't do anything. Have a cup of coffee.
I don't know. Go back to where we left off the last time. Quite a few weeks ago, and where I was talking about relationships. Is it possible that most relationships are just our own perceptions?
Quite a bit. Yeah.
You're often talking about just listening. In my, I'm trying to always fix things. And how hard it is to stop that.
Okay. What's the question?
Why is it necessary to stop that? I know it's a why question.
I don't know. What do you think?
What I've discovered is that they really don't want you to fix anything.
You don't have permission.
Right.
Someone can be, don't say right too quick. People might tell you, please help me, but they really just want an audience. Quite often people like to be victims. They like to be in the wrong. They like to be and have an image of being picked on. So they really don't want, they just want you to listen to their story about how terrible things are. And fundamentally, you can't really fix someone, their problems, their feelings, their emotions anyway. You can't really stop that. You have to do it yourself.
So how is compassion involved in that?
What do you mean by compassion? What's your understanding of compassion?
A lot of time it's not doing anything.
And what are you asking me? Just answer the question. I'm doing anything. So you've heard me say before, don't do anything unless you have to. In other words, stay in the background and watch what is happening, so you can get a better idea of what is actually occurring, rather than jump to conclusions based on your preconceptions.
I don't know if I want to expose too much
Who does?
to everyone.
Of course, it's an open interview, so we can stop. We can stop. There's other people I can coax. If I don't get some volunteers, I will select people based on their relationship to me. We've got quite a few people in here.
All right, I think I better.
Very good. Okay. Thank you so much for coming up. We got things started. Volunteer? You're next. Yes, sir.
Can you explain the difference between a mundane path and a spiritual path?
What do you think it is? You're a monk.
Could I ask a different question? Can there be a compromise between living a spiritual path, living a spiritual life, or a life devoted to transcending, and a mundane path of winning and losing?
I don't know if I would call it a compromise. I would just say that if you're living a spiritual path, let's start this way. If you're living a mundane path, there won't be much of a spiritual path there. But if you're living a spiritual path, then the mundane path is completely included.
How is it different than just a mundane path?
Mundane path is just looking at the 8 worldly dharmas: praise and blame, gain and loss, success and failure, winning and losing. There's any polarity. Anytime you can say anything, you can come up with its opposite, life and death, for that matter.
What do we do with the seduction of the mundane path, that you step onto a spiritual path and there's a magnetism to go back into a mundane way of living?
Just observe it. Just watch it. Don't do anything unless you have to. Don't go back. Stay. You've already started, especially in your situation where you received vows as a monk. So there's no reverse in your path.
Is there a way to just observe the pull towards old habits without having that affect or come into play with what you're doing now?
Can you give me an example?
Sure. If I think about pre-monk life.
Yeah.
Just the freedom to go play music, to go gigs and stuff, and I see that coming up, or the freedom to date lots of women.
It's a good thing your girlfriend is in retreat. His girlfriend's in retreat. She's not here.
She heard that.
She thinks she heard it through the floor.
She's starting to sweat. I noticed you see any one of those stories come up,
Yeah.
and it begins to impact my attitude, because the story becomes very strong.
Yeah.
So is there a way to just function while not going to war with the temptation to go into those habits?
So it's challenging for us in this culture because we're not in ancient Japan or Tibet or Korea or India. So that's why this is, I refer to this particular situation as like a hybrid, because I have a Tibetan teacher, I have a Japanese teacher. Those teachings are coming together, blending, overlapping, and so on. And then to make it even more difficult, we're in the United States. We're in this culture that we're in, which is there's more hybridization of the whole thing with all of the spiritual materialism that's going on. People trying to get places. There's so many different ways so many different things that come under the heading of meditation and a spiritual path. So, and lots of misunderstanding. So in your situation, specifically for you and for anyone living at this monastery, it's a matter of following the forms. The forms are very strong here. So as long as you work outside the monastery, which you need to do because we don't have scholarships. We don't have that. So it's necessary to work to pay tuition so that you can be here. So you seem to be doing okay in that area. You work. When you're at the temple, you practice, follow the forms. If you're here for a whole day, not a compliment, just a description. You seem to follow the forms. When I say follow, it means if it's time for a particular thing to happen, you're there. You do it. So I don't see where there's any problem there. So I think, though, maybe you're asking about how to work with your mind. And so when things arise in the mind about, I'd rather do something else, I don't want to do this, it's not a problem. Just continue to do this. And at the same time, don't completely shut down on that. In other words, the three poisons in Buddhism are passion, aggression, and ignorance. And if you can use those three, passion, pulling, manipulating, making excuses, praising, blaming, any of that shifting around as far as any of those stories we tell ourselves, there's that going on. And then there's also out and out aggression, trying to chop it, stop it, make it go away, fighting with it, arguing with ourselves, bringing some kind of aggressive emotion to it. And then the third one, the most difficult one to see, is ignoring, ignorance. In other words, distracting ourselves. Instead of actually working with the emotion that comes up and the very texture of that feeling, instead of allowing that to flood your awareness, which should be considerable, being that you're been here for 4 years, 6.5 hours of scheduled meditation here every weekday, sitting down, facing a wall, watching the mind come and go, come and go, come and go. So allowing that conflicting emotions about the nature of what's happening, which it sounds like that's what you're experiencing, instead of allowing that to play out and be whatever it is and find its own equilibrium or balance, we tend to pick sides based on on our presumptions, our preconceptions, our apparent beliefs. We tend to buy into right and try to exclude wrong. And the right and wrong are always based on partial evidence. It's the very nature of relative truth. It's the very nature of thinking there's some right and some wrong, and we have to get on the right. We have to do the right thing and have the right thing happen. So by staying there and observing that, by bringing your energy, your awareness to observing that, and then don't. The other thing I say, you've heard me say many, many times, don't do anything unless you have to. So what you're doing there, if the awareness is really powerful, you're not buying into it, you're not believing it, you're not disbelieving it, and you're not shutting down or looking away or ignoring it, then however that arises, may sound more complicated here than it actually is. When it actually happens, it's right now. This happens, that happens, this happens, and one time you may find yourself going out to play music or going out to a nightclub. And another time, maybe it would look like an identical situation to everyone else. You find yourself not doing that at all. So there's no way to kind of track down some kind of right protocol for how to act. The idea of having a formula for how to act is extra.
When it first comes up as a thought and it has a bit of quite a bit of energy to it, is there any type of controlling or settling it at all, or do you just let it rip?
Letting it rip is an expression of kind of backing off from it or something. It carries a kind of a backing out of it, a form of ignorance that is very sneaky. And I would just say, just stay with the feeling, stay with the texture of it, and see what, have some, for lack of a better word, have some courage to actually experience your negative emotions. Uncomfortable. More.
What do we get by just observing that discomfort, that negativity?
More work. More of the same, more work. Until the fundamental seeing, fundamental situation as being the fundamental lack of seeing the true identity, the lack of seeing that there is not a solid person there, not a solid ego. That is unreal. Until that happens, there's always going to be some kind of a backup thing. This happened, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, I'm experiencing this. We have the experience, and then we have someone who's experiencing it. And so it's frustrating, difficult. Being distracted by people leaving. Me too. It must be really boring.
Some of the smells.
Someone didn't use deodorant. Go ahead, please.
Sometimes I have trouble when that comes up when teaching meditation, to how to talk to people about when things become more difficult, or to say, yeah, you're probably gonna have to go further into that. How do you approach that when people bring that to you?
So it varies. If they've never received precepts, if they've never or asked for it, so they don't have any real strong. It's not that they're not sincere about getting through their suffering or understanding the truth. It's just that they've not gone that far, where they're actually willing to do something silly like ask for precepts, which to ego sounds like horse manure. Ego doesn't want to do that. So it's a little embarrassing to ego to actually do that. So what I would say overall, it depends on the age of the person, what their energy dynamic is, what their life problems seem to be. You're going to be knowing about those if they're talking to you. And the main thing is to encourage somebody to not give up and to keep going. And also the most important thing, because of the nature of our practice, is to encourage their awareness practice. How much are you sitting? Are you spending time sitting? If somebody brings negativity to you, how much time do you spend sitting down and just looking at your mind? Because if you have warfare going on deep inside, smoldering somewhere in some corner of your mind that you're not even aware of because you're shutting down on it, then that's going to keep bubbling up and causing problems. But if you talk to anyone who's meditated for a year, most people will say, I feel like I'm having more trouble now than I had when I started, but they still keep meditating. And quite often what's happening there is the person is actually beginning to see the degree to which they were fighting with themselves on a deep, deep level. So encouraging them, saw a new meditator, I would just say keep going, increase your time of sitting. Try to get in an hour a day. Do some, if they don't have a sangha or a group that they meditate with, if they're kind of lone rangers or something, then just say do block sitting. Spend every couple of weeks, sit down for 4 hours and just sit still and watch the mind move. Strengthen. It's like a muscle. It's not exactly like a muscle, but awareness it's like a muscle. So you need to exercise it more.
No, thank you.
Kevin? Yes, sir.
A lot of people didn't
I don't know why, but
something good in the kitchen, maybe.
for a smoke break.
Is there a ultimate goal to meditating, to sitting and practicing these hours every day?
There's a ultimate goal is different ways of saying it. The main thing, the traditional way, is to end suffering, end conflict, and end the warfare. But it might seem a little bit different to each person. Attain enlightenment, which would be see the fundamental nature of reality yourself. Buddhism is traditionally is not a belief system. Buddha never necessarily said you should believe in me or believe in something else. Any kind of belief like that.
Can we practice and have beliefs?
It's not a matter of getting rid of beliefs so much, a little bit, but it's mainly about seeing that something is a belief. It's something that you think is true with no real proof. You just think it's true. So as long as you're aware of that, then that belief is less like a brick wall and more like crepe paper. It's there, but it wouldn't take much to punch a hole in it. Just one thing that goes the other direction. Whereas if it's a brick wall, one thing that goes in a different direction it's not gonna make it through that brick wall. That brick wall is brick. So just using an image there. More. It's good to talk about beliefs. My idea, the way I talk about this is don't believe, don't disbelieve. You really don't need a position. You can live just fine with no position. The positionality of life is presenting itself moment by moment, and it is constantly changing.
How do my beliefs cause me suffering?
Because you think they're true. There's the primary belief is you think you're a separate being. You think that you are somehow. We use our names and our stories about ourselves and our history to substantiate that. And someone who is realized is called a Tathagata, one who comes thusly. There was no past, no future to speak of.
How do I separate what's true from what's untrue.
with a butter knife. Aha. Eat it way up. Why don't you answer that question? That's a good question, but why don't you, how do you separate, how are you doing it now? You're separating what's true from what's untrue.
I think I'm speaking more specifically about concepts that I hold on to.
Okay.
Maybe a more direct question would be, is it possible to separate truth from untruth? Or truth, things that are true.
Like relative truth, what is relatively true, what is relatively untrue, or you're getting pretty philosophical here, so I'm on really difficult ground here.
So I think the original question was how do I separate truth from untruth? Maybe the simpler question would be, how do I know what is true, especially in this practice?
Ask me.
What is true in this practice?
It's both true and untrue.
What
Relative truth is both true, playing around here, but relative truth is true and untrue, relatively speaking. That's why they call it relative truth. Absolute truth is absolutely true. And it's not separate from anything. So therefore it includes relative truth. It's absolute. More.
can the absolute truth be spoken about in relative terms?
It's been tried. It quite often gets more like, that's what quite often the reason for koans and trick stories or contradictory images and so on. Trying to take relative words and phrases and move them around in such a way that they'll evoke something in you that will, or so that you'll have some kind of insight into your true nature, which is unborn. Your true nature is unborn and unceasing. What hasn't been born can end. But we think we identify with our body mind, which of course is born and it's going down, it's going to die. Nothing lasts. But we're attached to that, so we fear death.
What is it that is attached to life and birth and death?
What do you think?
Me?
Okay, let's go with that. Now what?
What is me?
My teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, called it a paranoid insurance policy. Which grasping himself, so that because if we don't hook onto something, there's just too much space. It's too open. We're too vulnerable. So we need to clamp down. That's where you have opinions. That's where beliefs come from. That's where this fundamentalist religion comes from. This locking down on things. This is right. This is the right way. We have to do it this way. Some people are so completely freaked out that they will kill other people to support their closed-mindedness. They torture others. They're that worried, that freaked out, that paranoid.
Is there a relative right and wrong?
And it looks like it. Like relatively don't kill. And they're not going overboard the other direction. So it's why Buddhism is called the middle way. Why don't you ask me some questions about your situation instead of these philosophical.
My knees hurt.
Stretch your legs. Sit in a chair.
I've been sitting now for 6 weeks or so,
Mhm.
and I came into the practice thinking I knew something about the practice,
Mhm.
but as I sit, I am starting to realize that I don't know anything about the practice, and that I'm not sure what I'm doing here.
That's good.
What am I doing here?
Asking that kind of a question. So you're here, you're practicing. For one, you made a commitment to me to stay here for 3 months of practice. So you made an agreement. So that's what you're doing. If you you can leave before then, but you'd have to get permission. If you don't get permission, I'm coming after you. You don't want that. So, but it's a mutual thing. You know, you come and practice. I know that you can't do this half-assed. It has to be a really important part of your life, and it's not for everyone. Some people are busy, you know, starting businesses, having families, building tree huts. People are doing whatever they're doing, and they should. I would leave them alone. I wouldn't try to change someone. But if someone comes here, when you walk in here, you give me permission to talk to you. And since my life has been about this for a long time, and then if you come in, then I relate to you where you're at. And if you weren't given any sales pitch that I know of, so you came in and you presented what you wanted to do, and I said this is what you would have to do. We talked about it. Now you're here. You've got 6 weeks to go, 5 weeks, and then you reevaluate. But it seems to me like you asked for precepts, didn't you? 5 times.
Maybe 6, but
Yeah, don't exaggerate it. I've never turned anybody down 6 times. So, but I turn people down to make real. I don't want someone to waste their time doing this. So I turn people down so they really have to think about this. Sometimes people just turn around and go the other way anyway. So you may be around a little bit longer than 5 more weeks. And so, but the feeling of not knowing exactly what you're doing, this comes and goes. That will go away, and then you'll might have more understanding about it. And then that'll start to peel off again, and that'll go back to being that big empty spot, empty space. It's actually the way emptiness feels when you start to lose your traction in terms of your passion, aggression, ignorance, start to lose your reference points. This is the beginning of the teaching of emptiness. That things are empty of what we think they are. So we have our own personal. Everyone has their own personal kind of run-in with that, and sometimes it's terrifying, especially if you've been really covering it up and you've been really living in your opinions, your beliefs, your structure, and everything else, and then you start to meditate. There's also drugs will do that. If you're locking into certain things and you take lysergic acid, bathylamide 25, you are going to lose your way for about 12 hours, unless it's window pane. I'm joking. I don't know anything about that stuff. So, the idea there are ways to interfere with meditation is some way that will come in and actually make powerful inroads into invading the territory, the fortress of ego, the bureaucracy of ego. It starts to come apart, and ego at the center of that does not want this to happen. So one's inspiration is initially to be awake, to awaken, to live a peaceful, loving, kind life, sane. So when we first look at that ego says, well, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go meditate. But then when ego starts to realize what ego is in for, then ego might not want to do this anymore. So that's why we have things like precepts and so on, because so that your inspiration to awaken becomes more powerful than the propaganda of ego. Like, don't do this. This is a cult.
Will the ego ever go away? Will it shed? Will it diminish so
It
that
doesn't
I
need
don't
to.
hear
It
it?
doesn't need to. Doesn't need to do anything. It's unreal. Ego is it's unreal. It's like a movie. It's like a stage set, like a play. And when you see that it's unreal, it doesn't have to go away. It can do anything it wants because you no longer believe it, nor do you disbelieve it. You take no position.
Is ego?
Do you hear what I said? Because you're asking the next question awfully quickly.
Yes, I did hear.
What did I say?
Don't believe it or disbelieve it. That is ego.
You sure?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Is that what you said? That wasn't that funny.
Presume to question me. I think that's what I said.
Yeah,
I admit what I said.
pretty sure that's what you said.
Go ahead.
Is ego? Is ego this sort of chatter, the storylines and the discriminations and the presumptions and the judgments that arise as I look at form and fixate on objects?
Yeah, that's the description of it. Just a lot of stuff arising that looks true and untrue. Believable, it looks right, wrong, I should, I shouldn't, it's good, it's bad. Constant evaluating, clinging, rejecting, hoping, wishing, based on what? Partial evidence. It's not that that's the problem. Some of what is happening is relatively true, but you can never see the big picture. You never can see the entire situation unless you're awake. And if you are realized, or if you're awake, then everywhere you look, you see the big picture. So nothing intimidates you any longer. Even if you're a Leo.
What about that? The mind that can be inspired and that can be creative, is that also ego?
What?
The part of the mind that thinks and develops theories and creates art and makes music.
If that's all it does, then no, it's not necessarily ego. But if it adds one thing, like if it does something and then there's a little, that's a good job. Or if it does something and said, you screwed up. It's the addition, it's the extra. Just living and just moving here, moving there, painting pictures, writing music, dancing. It's the extra that becomes fixated. It's like we tend to grab onto things and we don't want them to move. Don't leave, or go away. So the aggression and then the passion. We don't have to leave you. You don't have to leave you. No. Something more entertaining in my position. You can sit down. They'll come to the door. If they don't, we'll take you home.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I had no more questions.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes. So you got off, didn't you?
I'm raised from him.
Sheldon B. Yes,
Hold
lot of times you've talked about returning to original inspiration.
Yes.
My original inspiration for a spiritual path was to stop drinking
How long ago was that?
26 years ago.
Okay.
That's changed a lot over 26 years. My understanding of it has changed a lot.
How long have you been meditating?
About 5 years. Okay. The question about that is,
Okay.
when I first started on that spiritual path, I had understanding I had to believe, my problem was alcoholism, and I had to believe things in order to not continue to drink.
Yes.
And my view of that has changed a lot since I got here, since I started cutting through just meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of people come here because of that same situation. They're here because of alcoholism and drug addiction.
Yeah, we work with people that have that problem. Yes. And how's that working so far?
How can we help them? How can we help them not get stuck in that situation? I felt like I didn't feel like it at the time, but now that I look back on it, I was stuck in a situation that was
Of what?
maybe not so helpful, and fundamentalism and belief.
It's, everyone has a different set of, however you want to say it, baggage, different ability to have insight. People tend to grasp onto a self in a different way. People tend to operate out of hope and fear in lots of different ways. And the only way you can do this, really, and you've heard me say this before, is to meet people where they're at. In order to meet someone where they're at, you have to see where they're at and not project your ideas onto them and then meet your ideas about them. So you have to actually see. In order to see where someone's at, first of all, you have to see where you're at. You have to know who you are. You have to have made friends with yourself, so there's no more warfare. I'm not saying there isn't difficulty or suffering. There can still be suffering, but you have to have no more warfare with yourself. And then you can meet others who are at war with themselves and don't even know it, and try to cover all that up with drugs. Then you can meet them where they're at, and if they're ready, if they're victims, you might not be able to help them. But if they're ready, then you may be able to introduce an awareness practice to them that would bring some light down into those dark corners. That's all awareness is light. Bring light down into those dark corners so they could see that they're pretty good just the way they are. Nobody needs fixing. More or further on that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So maybe I can help somebody.
Yeah, you can. Make friends with yourself. And then everybody you meet, if there's a possibility, there's an openness for you to help them, then it'll arise. But we can't really do it as kind of an agenda. Although the vow we take here is to be with all things, save all beings. How do you do that? Start with your own thought pattern. Stop killing your thoughts. We actually think we have good thoughts and bad thoughts. They're just thoughts. Anything else? Thank you. Any final questions before we fade off into the sunset? Yes.
Question. Is being moved by something you've created ego?
Is being moved?
By something you've created ego?
When you say being moved, you mean emotion?
Emotion inspired?
Probably not, but it's the second commentary on it that tends to be self-centered.
look what I've created and how I move myself.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Look what a wonderful creative person I am. I can't imagine I got with my upbringing, and here I am to being this wonderful creative genius kind of person. I think that all the time. How did I get here to be well, I'm not really famous, an obscure monk in a relatively unknown little town in Battle Creek with a bunch of flakes. So anytime you have an emotion about it, emotion is wonderful. Passion is wonderful. We're not trying to get rid of passion, even aggression, or even ignorance. There's some of that's going to be happening just being a human being. It's when it gets cranked up and gets fueled like so a little bit of pushing is okay. There's a Rinpoche, when asked, I can't remember what the question was one time Trungpa Rinpoche was kind of put on not put on the spot, but he was asked a question, well, how what about anger? When you get angry with something that's out of whack or something. He says, well, there could be anger without hatred. Just irritated with something, you're angry about something. That kind of anger doesn't hang around long. It's the kind of anger that something triggers something and the anger comes up. That's fairly natural for that to happen in certain situations when you're somebody bumps into you or whatever they might do, but it dies down really fast. It does not last. Fixation is not there. Okay, I guess we can close then. And I'm not sure if your transportation is there, but probably not yet. I'd be shocked if they were here this early. Would I be shocked?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would be.
In the back of your Red Champ books is our dedication of merit. Please join us. And also, please help us financially by donating. We just recently had an $18 donation from someone in Colorado, someone we don't even know. So any little bit always helps.
May the awareness penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho-san, ji-ji. Ji-son-gu-san. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with